The automation riots were the culmination of decades of disenfranchisement and labor violations throughout the pre-war United States of America, resulting in region-wide protests and violence from both the protesters and the government. As the Sino-American War dragged on, turning into a total war, the development of advanced robotic systems facilitated a massive wave of unemployment, with labor-intensive jobs such as mining and factory work at the forefront, and large-scale environmental and societal disruption. Strategic contractors were given effectively free rein. Vault-Tec privatized Morgantown after taking over its community college and rebranding it as the Vault-Tec University. Grafton Steel turned the northern end of the forest into the toxic valley. Hornwright Industrial Mining Company turned Mount Blair and its environs into the ash heap, using the Rockhound from 2070 onwards, then set the abandoned mines on fire to extract trace amounts of minerals from the smoke using ash forges, repurposed air scrubbers given to the company by the Clear Skies Alliance, and then transformed into ore aerosolizing collection devices. However, the greatest changes came with mass automation, with Watauga, the city of the future, being the most extreme example. Almost every job was given over to robots, creating a purported utopia. Headquartered in Watauga, the Atomic Mining Services initiated underground nuclear tests through the Cranberry Bog in order to create ultracite, an extremely potent source of energy. Although human miners were used initially, AMS planned to replace them entirely with Hornwright auto miners as well. The complete replacement did not take place only because the company still needed someone to haul the ultracite out, but miners still received reduced pay, while techs maintaining the bots were paid up to 10 times more. As early as 2061, the region was rife with homelessness, with workers in the region struggling to make ends meet or provide for their families. Many of them lost their jobs to rapid automation implemented by companies. Many of the affected workers were miners. Robco was considered a main perpetrator. Its wide range of robots were designed to replace human workers in jobs deemed too dangerous, but many people in Appalachia saw them as a threat to their jobs, replacing miners, construction workers, policemen, and soldiers. However, not everyone was fully opposed to automation, with the pioneer scouts utilizing a range of robots as scout leaders after their human counterparts were put out of commission by a few incidents. The wave of automation culminated with Ballot Measure 6, the Appalachian Prosperity Act backed by Governor Evans, whose economic policies resulted in rapid automation at any cost in Appalachia. Set for a vote in November, the measure would issue a $2.6 billion bond to begin the process of replacing all human workers in the Appalachian government with automated systems, with the goal of complete automation by 2087. For many in the region, it became a perfect example of the proxy war between local workers and the conglomerates, such as the aforementioned Hornwright Industrial and Atomic Mining Services, driving the shift away from traditional labor. Among the many opponents of the measure, Senator Sam Blackwell rose to prominence, advocating against what he described as a slow-moving disaster that would leave the people with nothing but pink slips and empty bellies. Peaceful protests were staged at first, including pickets at AMS sites throughout the Cranberry Bog by miners displaced by auto miners. Despite the bloody fighting elsewhere, the rioting in Charleston was limited due to a heavy presence of military bots, especially outside the headquarters of Hornwright Industrial Headquarters. A separate facet of the riots took place at Poseidon Energy Plant WV06, a coal power plant originally built in the 1970s to provide power for the western parts of Appalachia, refitted with ultracite leased from AMS. The influence of these two companies and their close ties to the federal government resulted in intense controls and oversight. The switchover coincided with an increasingly hostile approach to workers at the plant, culminating in a walkout. The workers wanted a contract that gave them job security and were supported by the Associated Miners Union. As per company policy, all workers who joined the picket outside the plant were fired on the spot. As the plant was using ultracite, the plant security manager had no trouble convincing the executives that this was a national security issue. The National Guard arrived with heavy tanks, APCs, and a full load of Hallucigen Inc. patented riot control gas. The plan was to gas the picketing strikers, making them turn on each other, turning a strike into a deadly riot, that could then be leveraged to further weaken organized labor. What they did not realize was that the gas would turn the peaceful protesters into a violent mob. Once the gas took effect, they rushed through the smoke, attacking the soldiers and tearing off their gas masks, turning the strike into a bloody disaster. The unrest peaked when AMS forced families out of the town of Welch in early October 2077. The initial resistance was against the AMS corporate agents sent to evict the families of Welch, which became corporate territory. The agents were ambushed and shot when they tried to force Kaminsky's out, triggering the first confrontation in Appalachia. The disenfranchised workers of Appalachia organized themselves quickly, setting up roadblocks and shutting down roads and factories across the western reaches of West Virginia, coordinating their efforts out of Stryker Row, a staging area in the remote areas of the southern ash heap. Despite initial successes, the miners were not equipped for dealing with the National Guard and corporate enforcers, especially when the Hornwright-funded fleet of strikebreaker robots, customized by Robco Industries, arrived in the ash heap, using lethal force to contain and eliminate the workers. The home of the millionaires of Appalachia, Bramwell was home to some of the most disastrous riots, with some of the miners successfully bringing down an unfinished mega mansion with mining explosives and attacking executives leaving for work from their fortified mansions. One of the historical centers of industry in Appalachia, Beckley was turned into a fortress by the protesters and acted as a base from which to launch raids on corporate facilities along the southern edge of Mount Blair. The National Guard attempted to force the barricades by ramming armored personnel carriers into them and dispersing hallucinogens riot gas, leading to bitter street fighting. The workers were smart enough to board up buildings and establish their base on the rooftops of the town, including an infirmary. Located in the northern part of the region, Clarksburg was a relatively low priority, and the workers managed to secure it with relative ease. The National Guard planned to dislodge them using tanks and got as far as shutting down access roads into the valley, cutting off access to the town, but the Great War precluded any further crackdowns. On Mount Blair, miners seized the Rockhound, a major symbol of automation. For 8 days the miners held out, striking and demanding a right to work, until the National Guard sent in specially designed fleets of combat robots, strikebreakers, commissioned by Hornwright in the wake of the mine protests to eliminate the rioters. Resembling to some the events of the Battle of Mount Blair over 150 years earlier, the strikebreakers took out the miners and returned control of the Rockhound to Hornwright. Seeking to increase profits, or at least to keep up with other companies, an unnamed factory in Pittsburgh began to purchase Protectrons as labor and place them throughout the facility. Despite the reassurances of management, the workers were fearing for their livelihoods. The manager of the plant, Tom McMullen, tried to delay their eventual termination by complaining to management about problems with the equipment, declaring that because of this, they would not be ready for the next shipment. Management went to the plant to review the machines, seeing firsthand how they were working fine, outcompeting their best employees by a factor of 5. This was also when the employees began to vandalize the automatons, 2 of who were caught by management and promptly fired. 2 new Protectrons immediately replaced them on the assembly line, followed by the delayed shipment. The company chose to inform the termination of its employees via a loudspeaker, which announced that all employees had to leave by 1:00 p.m., stating that, due to budget cuts, this plant is shutting down. At once, everyone knew there were no cuts, and their machine replacements were here and began to riot. The employees began to barricade the doors and take up arms. As a senior employee, Tom McMullen was blamed by the workers as helping replace them. Now in a panic, he grabbed his pistol and tried to make a break for the door, eventually having to run into a utility closet and lock the door behind him. The workers that cornered McMullen laughed at his pleas for them to vacate the premises, determined to assault him for not being truthful to them about their impending termination. This was when the Protectrons arrived. At first, they believed that they could handle a few Protectrons. Their laughter turned into cursing and screaming as the Protectrons fought back with their lasers, slaughtering the employees still on the premises.